Hello, I am Hesham Yasser from Egypt, and this is my CS50's Introduction to Cybersecurity Final Project. My edX username is Hesham Yasser37, and my GitHub username is Hesham0001. I recorded this video on 10 October 2025. The incident I will discuss is CVE-2024-53704. Disclosed in January 2025, a remote authentication bypass and session hijacking vulnerability affecting SonicWall's SSL VPN products. I chose this topic because it directly relates to many topics we covered in the course, such as cookies, authentication, VPN, SSL, and TLS. This video uses an automated text-to-speech voice. The research, slides, and script are my own.
This incident concerns CVE-2024-53704, an authentication bypass vulnerability in SonicWall's SSL VPN that affects SonicOS versions 7.1.x and certain 8.0.0 builds, including 8035. The flaw allows a remote, unauthenticated attacker to hijack active VPN sessions and thereby access internal network resources. Bishop Fox published a proof of concept, and SonicWall released vendor patches in January 2025. In the rest of this presentation, I will explain the technical root cause and walk through the attack chain and POC and describe the impact and detection methods.
Now, let me provide some technical background. SonicWall SSL VPN is a widely used product that organizations use to give employees and partners secure remote access to internal corporate networks. It relies on SSL TLS encryption to protect traffic and on web-based authentication to control who can enter. After login, the server issues a session cookie that maintains the authenticated state of the user. Because VPN appliances are internet-facing, which means it connected and exposed to the internet, and it acts as a single entry point to many sensitive internal resources, it becomes a highly attractive target for attackers. In this particular case, the vulnerability was rooted in how session handling and authentication checks were implemented. A weakness in that process allowed attackers to bypass the expected login flow. Understanding this background information set the stage for why the flaw had such serious dangers, and it also ties directly into course concepts such as authentication and access control and session management and VPN and also SSL.
Now I'll cover the basic technologies involved, SSL or TLS, and VPNs, and why they matter for this vulnerability. SSL or TLS is the protocol used to protect communications over the internet. Its primary goals are confidentiality by encrypting the traffic so attackers can't read it, by ensuring data is not modified in transit, and also authentication, that letting the user verify it is talking to a safe server. A VPN, or virtual private network, builds on these protections to create an encrypted tunnel between a remote user and their corporate network, allowing remote users to access internal resources as if they were on site. An SSL VPN specifically uses web-based authentication to establish a session and then relies on TLS to protect the session traffic. After a successful login, the server issues a session cookie that the client presents on subsequent requests to prove it is authenticated. And most importantly that TLS protects the confidentiality and safety of the channel, but it doesn't by guarantee that the session cookie is valid. If the server's session handling or authentication checks are flawed, an attacker can hijack or spoof a session even though the channel is encrypted. That's why an authentication bypass vulnerability in an SSL VPN is so dangerous. It cancels the access controls that the VPN is supposed to do and gives attackers a path directly into internal systems despite TLS being in use.
Now I'll dig into the vulnerability details. The issue is tracked as CVE-2024-53704. And is classified as an authentication bypass that enables session hijacking in SonicWall's SSL VPN.
It affects multiple Sonic OS releases, specifically 7.1.x and certain 8.0.0 builds, such as 8035. The root cause is a defect in the device's session handling and authentication logic. In reality, the VPN server failed to enforce expected authentication checks on some code paths or to validate sessions strongly. As a result, an attacker who can craft specific requests or replay certain session artifacts could be treated by the server as an already authenticated user. In practice, that means the attacker does not need valid credentials. They can hijack an active session or otherwise gain the same access that a logged-in user has. Bishop Fox published a POC, proof of concept, shows this behavior, which made the flaw publicly visible and sparked rapid exploitation attempts. SonicWall released vendor patches in January 2025 to correct the session validation logic and close the bypass. Because the vulnerability impacts session control rather than the encryption layer, standard TLS protections do not prevent this attack. TLS protects the channel, but if the server accepts a forged or improperly validated session, the attacker still gains access behind the VPN.
Here is the attack chain. First, the attacker performs reconnaissance to find internet-facing SonicWall SSL VPN appliances. Next, using the weakness described in CVE 2024-53704, the attacker crafts or replays a session or sends a specifically malformed request that exercises the flawed code path. Because the vulnerable server does not properly validate the session or the authentication check, it accepts the request and treats the attacker as an authenticated user. At that point, the attacker can use the established session to reach internal resources. Bishop Fox published a proof of concept that demonstrates this sequence.
The practical impact of such an authentication bypass is very dangerous. Once inside the VPN, attackers can access sensitive internal resources and systems. This enables data exfiltration, theft of credentials, or even privilege escalation if other weaknesses exist. Beyond technical damage, affected organizations face reputational harm and possible regulatory consequences, especially if personal data is exposed. As soon as a vulnerability like this is disclosed or signs of exploitation appear, operators typically need to apply emergency patches and consider revoking active sessions or forcing password resets.
Detection focuses on identifying abnormal session behavior, such as multiple sessions using the same token from different IPs, or session reuse patterns, or authentication events that bypass normal login events. The public timeline for the vulnerability involved discovery by a security researcher and responsible disclosure to SonicWall, and a proof-of-concept publication, and then vendor patches in January 2025. In response, operators should prioritize patching vulnerable devices, revoking active sessions or forcing reauthentication, rotating any exposed credentials, and conducting log and network forensics. Forensics should include collecting VPN logs, reviewing session tokens and timestamps, and scanning internal hosts for lateral movement or persistence.
In conclusion, this vulnerability demonstrates how a flaw in session handling can effectively bypass the protections that SSL, TLS, and VPNs are meant to provide. I've included references on the final slide, including links for the Bishop Fox write-up, Security Week, the Hacker News, National Vulnerability Database. Thank you for watching.